Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Seraphin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. Familiar with the name. Familiar with the name.
Let's bring in Kyle Seraphin. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public. We're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
He's the host of something that strangely is called the Kyle Seraphin Show.
Kyle Seraphin, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Thursday, and it is May the 9th, and we are getting rolling right now on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Have you guys joined us over here in the live chat? Have you hit the like button? Have you hit the subscribe? Have you been notified that we are going live? You guys can do so right here on the website, flashing across the screen. You should make sure that you are following us over on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. And you can also even support the channel financially if you are so interested. It's $5 a month. It's cheap. It's just the same thing they do on locals. We may use that at some point in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do a little interesting show today. We're going to play a interview that I did a couple days ago. Sometimes we can't line schedules up to do them live, so I wanted to bring it to you before it's not relevant, and while it is still something we are thinking about. We've talked a little bit about abortion, we've talked about the white supremacy BS. What I wanted to dig into is more the open border failure that is existing in the United States. That open border failure is something the Biden administration seems very committed to. And one of the major things that it does is it kills off Americans. We're going to get into that long form. Before we do that, I want to say thanks to the sponsors that keep the show rolling. Specifically, guys, check this out on the screen right there. Two very good looking hard tumblers. They have suspendables logos on them. You can get your own at patriotcoolers.com. Again, the website is patriotcoolers.com. Go into the shop. Make sure you figure out whether you like a coffee cup, whether you want a tumbler, whether you want a mug, whatever. And then you can go into customize. It's just below the add to cart button. It's a blue bar that says customize. Click on that. Click on stock images. It's the top left-hand little option there. And then you'll see a tab for suspendables. We've got a couple of logos and you can stack them as you're seeing right there. I use the suspendables flag with the rifle on top of it. Got another one over there with the Betsy Ross S. That's all the stars around the S and the rifle around that one. They look awesome. You can get them either laser etched or it'll be printed on depending on the type of tumbler you choose. If you've been waiting and thinking, hey, I'm going to replace that old garbage tumbler I have. It's all beat up. I broke the lid. This is how you do it. PatriotCoolers.com. Promo code Kyle, K-Y-L-E. K-Y-L-E will save you 10% if you decide to go that route. And also, the kind of the nice thing is they sell replacement lids. I like that. They actually have multiple different kinds of lids. I just did my order and I bought not just the snap shut, like what they call spill proof lid, but I got the spill resistant lid, which you can pop off and you can throw like a big straw in, which works if you're a smoothie guy, if you're used to doing shakes in the morning. In any case, folks, I also want to say thanks to my buddies over at the Catholic Vote. You guys know how to go there and get the loop. It's catholicvote.org. The website, again, catholicvote.org. And make sure you're following them, not just on social media, like a Twitter or whatever, a True Social. You can do that. That's at Catholic Vote. Very easy. But also find them either on YouTube, if you're watching us there, or on Rumble at their YouTube and Rumble channels, because we're about to drop probably every Thursday and Friday. What you're seeing is a new little podcast we're doing called Between the Lines. It's a long form commentary. You'll get that, plus a couple of others like Edify, which is a lot more like a PragerU. They do some really good, well-produced content that's short, and you can grab and hand it off to people about values and Christianity in this country, and maybe why the godless pagans, as my buddy George Hill talks about, are really the problem. They're breaking the first commandment, right? They made themselves God. That's a no-go in this world. All right. Let's see if there's anything else we want to cover. Let's go ahead and jump right into our guest. I think you guys are going to be appreciative of some very strong information. Nothing like getting yelled at by a New Yorker at the end of the week. So we are going to do that. And I think you guys will have fun with this one. We'll wrap this thing up. I promise I'll give you a palate cleanser because we're going to need it.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a guest that has a ton of experience in the national security realm, that also has a ton of experience in federal law enforcement, 28 years with the DEA. He was the special operations director for their programs. We're going to get into his background more. We just found out that we had a connection from my previous life when I was in the Air Force, and we'll bring him on right away. It's Derek Maltz. You've seen him on OANN, you've seen him on Newsmax, you've seen him on Fox, you've seen him wherever they'll talk to him. Buddy, thanks for joining me. I'm really appreciating this. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate your service, too. I mean, thank you for what you've done in the Air Force and FBI. And I know the story of my brothers put chills in my body, so thank you.
So what we just talked about before we started rolling here is that your brother was a hero in my previous career field that I served in the Air Force. I went to go be a pararescueman, and that's an incredibly difficult path. And the men that have died in that career field, that in the line of duty or in that duty operational sort of space, they're all known. They all have plaques on the wall, and I've polished your brother's plaque, which is a wild thing. You want to tell a little bit about your brother and who he was?
Yeah, so Mike was in the Air Force for, over 20 years. He was actually in Afghanistan, Operation Enduring Freedom. Unfortunately, the helicopter went down, and he and 5 buddies on the helicopter died in a fiery crash in the mountain in Afghanistan. And ever since that day, my life has kind of changed, because it's everything about the country and trying to break down walls between the different agencies and do what's right for the American taxpayer to keep America safe. So, yeah, Mike's been an inspiration. In every month of March, every year, they have the Maltz Challenge. So we're coming up on the Maltz Challenge. I'll be going to the Under Armour Baltimore Ravens facility to honor Mike and all these DOD warriors that have died in the line of duty. We do a CrossFit challenge and just a day to honor these brave Americans that gave up their lives.
Yeah, truly a hero. It's a heroic field. It's a heroic job to do pararescue. And when you're going through that training, and you may know this already, but all the trainees that are going through, one of the things we do is we do a certain amount of push-ups on the way in and out of every building. We pay homage to those who have come before us and those who have fallen. And so you always do one additional push-up on top of the 50 for teamwork, which is the name of the game when you're trying to do that job. And the last one is for a fallen comrade. And there's always a name. And if we don't know the names and the stories of them when quizzed, then there's more push-ups to follow. And I've done push-ups for your brother. And anyway, just an honor. I didn't know that before we started talking, so I'm excited about that. Let's talk about you growing up. I can hear from the accent, you've got that sort of Strong Island sound. You want to talk about who you are, where you grow up, and give people a lens before we get into the dirty business here.
So I normally say I was born in Mississippi, but nobody believes me, right? So I was born in New York. My father was 30 years in the DEA, a very dedicated, legendary guy. As a matter of fact, they just named the DEA gym the John Maltz Fitness Center. They have a leadership award in the Federal Law Enforcement Foundation in New York after him. But anyway, so I was a kid growing up with a father that was never home. And when I was 22 years old, after graduating college, my father actually pushed me into the DEA field. I'm very thankful that he did, because I had no idea, like most kids, what I wanted to do. And I had 28 years of fun. But my father retired as the head of the New York Drug Enforcement Task Force in Manhattan, the oldest and largest task force in America, drug task force. And I ultimately rose through the ranks and took his job in New York City, which was really cool. But then in 2005, I got promoted to be the head of the DEA Special Operations Division in Washington area. And at the time, there were 9 agencies. But when I retired 10 years later, there were 30 agencies, 3 countries, and the NYPD. And by the way, we also had FBI counterterrorism representatives there as well, because over the years, we now all know that the terrorists tap into criminal proceeds for funding at times, and we need to work seamlessly across these different agencies. So I had very good relationships with FBI and these other agencies, built up a synchronization center. As a matter of fact, one of the things I always talk about, because I think it's kind of cool, I'll take the plaque off the wall, so that when the White House called my operation, we went and took down Victor Bout, right? He was the international arms smuggler that the current administration just sent back in a prisoner swap to Russia for Brittany Griner. So we did some really interesting stuff. I had a good time. And now I kind of, my passion, I work for a software company that sells data analytic and wiretap software to the government agencies around the world. But I also actually now have a passion to support all these families. As you can see behind me, every day I wake up and I do whatever I can to spread awareness and save lives, because the families, they had no voice. They're starting to get a voice. And, we try to get them on TV. We try to get them in front of Congress. We bring them to events. And now I'm also part of Border 911, which is a nonprofit that was set up by the former ICE director, Tom Holman. And on that team is myself, Tom Holman, Mark Morgan, former CBP commissioner, Border Patrol chief, FBI executive, and also Rodney Scott, Border Patrol chief, Sarah Carter from Fox News, and Jason Jones. So we're having an event in Mar-a-Lago on April 4th to try to raise awareness and actually spread this information of facts around the country. One thing I want to make really clear, my day-to-day operation has nothing to do with politics. It's like I've said now, the issues we're talking about are not red and blue, they're red, white, and blue. Every American is being impacted from the craziness that we're facing now in America. And there's a lot of people to blame, but I'm not in the blame game. I'm into like solutions and trying to figure out what to do to move forward.
I want to go back in time a little bit. We're going to work our way up to that. Obviously, that is a crisis that people are starting to understand. The border, the fentanyl sort of impact on all the families, and that the collage on your wall is impactful. So anybody who's listening to our audio show, what you're missing out on is hundreds, it looks like, of faces of families that have been affected by the poisoning. And I think you're one of the great voices that's accurately calling it out like that. I think it takes that knowledge and background to talk about it. But let me step back to the academy days. Before you did the 28 years, you're at the academy. The DEA academy is at Quantico. Was it at Quantico at the time?
Yes, it was at. We used a lot of the FBI facilities at the time. Now they have their own academy, but yeah, we stayed at the FBI academy.
Now, what was the rivalry looking like between FBI and DEA at the time that you were there, or if there was one?
Well, you know, back in those days, there really wasn't tremendous rivalry. I remember, you know, when I first came on, they had the very devastating Miami shooting at FBI Miami agents that were killed. I can't remember how many at the time, but it was devastating as a new agent. So we kind of were very aligned with FBI at the time. There was no kind of fighting really, you know, because it was like we were in this together, right? We're all trying to save lives and stuff like that. But I remember that vividly because I was at the academy when it happened.
When I was there, which was obviously many years later, one of the things that kind of stuck out to me is that I remember seeing FBI trainees that were kind of, you know, looking down their nose at guys at the DEA like it wasn't something else. Yeah. And I remember looking over the DEA guys, and they looked bigger, fitter, more militaristic. They looked like they were in formation. They knew how to like form up and move things. There was a guide on. They were, you know, jogging. There was fitness. That was part of their routine. And I thought maybe I joined the wrong group here because the people I'm with look like a bunch of nerds, and those guys look like a bunch of fighters. It's always funny. Those reputations come and go. They always change. And it's interesting that you guys were aligned. That 1986 shooting happened in Miami, and I think that's fun how that environment has changed. It's sad to see it now. All right, so you've had tons of experience across all those different boundaries. What was the most rewarding part? Because I think people get they get frustrated with the concept of the war on drugs. But maybe we can maybe we can humanize that it's not about drugs per se, because those people wouldn't otherwise be great human beings if they're trafficking drugs. Is that accurate?
Right. First of all, there's never been a war on drugs except for a limited time in Colombia when we used military assets to go after, you know, Pablo Escobar and kill him. Right. So if we had a war on drugs, we'd have drones up in the sky and we'd be annihilating the Mexican cartels, super labs, and their clandestine operations and their command and control, because the Mexican cartels have killed more Americans than any terrorist organization in the history of this country that I'm aware of. But so we're not at war with the drug traffickers. As a matter of fact, they're not even drug traffickers anymore. They've evolved to narco-terrorists. That's what they are. And they're our enemy. They're our greatest enemy to our children right now because they're killing at historic levels. So I'm not a big fan of those words about war on drugs. What we try to do every day is when we used to seize these little glassine bags that had 90% pure heroin, we knew that we saved a life. All right. So the DEA agents understood that every day you're out on the streets, you're seizing drugs, you're taking away weapons, you're taking down leaders of these different groups locally and regionally, internationally, and you just got to keep fighting. Right. So in that sense, it was a war. Yeah, we were fighting every day trying to save lives. But we always tried to rationalize that, you know, that particular bag of heroin now is fentanyl. And it only takes 2 milligrams to kill. Like Kyle, like people don't realize, like right here is 30 grams of salt. If this is 30 grams of fentanyl, right, this could kill 15,000 people. Okay, it only takes milligrams, like 2 milligrams. So the world is changing quickly, but in the world of a DEA agent, it was very rewarding to know when you actually seized a kilogram of heroin That's 20,000 in these little bags, okay? That's a lot of lives you potentially save. So there's a different way to look at it, but when I look back, what's really disturbing to me is how much out of control this is, because synthetic drugs have been a game changer, and we'll get to that. But China and the Communist Party of China's role now in the global drug trafficking issues, that's what's concerning to me, because it's way beyond the opioid crisis or any drug crisis we've ever faced. Right now we have mass poisoning in our country, and our government and our people are not connecting the dots. And that's what I've been trying to do as well, to connect the dots, to show people with facts what's happening.
It seems to me that a lot of folks have biases, that maybe they're libertarian. I think a lot of people on the conservative side kind of lean towards that libertarian thing. It's like, well, who cares if somebody wants to do cocaine? Who cares if somebody wants to do heroin? That's not really the moral threat. As maybe a moral or a religious person, you may have some issues with it. But on the legal side, a lot of people don't understand that it's not about the drug and the action. It's the fact that this is funding a bigger apparatus. These are massive multi-billion-dollar multinational businesses that basically have said, there's a legal way to do business. We're not interested in that. There's a ton more money in doing otherwise. And so smuggling drugs, smuggling weapons, smuggling people, the real threat is far bigger than some guy wants to get high in his apartment. That's not the thing that I think that the DEA handles. Maybe we can kind of talk about the apparatus, like what that threat really is, so that when we hear things like people mischaracterizing the issue, it's not about some guy who just wants to do something, listen to records in his basement and wants to sniff a line of cocaine. Whether that's good or bad morally is another animal. That's not what the DEA is about. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. DEA has always been about, in my experience, is going after the entire network from top to bottom. Obviously, it's very challenging. It's very complex. And right now, the DEA and other law enforcement agencies are more and more in the dark now than ever, because all the technology that's been deployed to the bad guys, they have such a significant advantage because they don't have a budget, restriction or constraints. They don't have all this bureaucracy and these legal obstacles that get in the way. They have a objective to maximize profits, and they're absolutely able to do it because they're taking advantage of U.S. vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And now with the wide open border, it's made things worse. But in regards to your earlier point, right now, what everybody should be concerned about is the Communist Party of China's influence on the death and destruction in America right now with these poisonous substances. That's the real issue.
Let's do pipeline if we can. Let's start from the logistical end. Let's start it over in China. If you would kind of lay out what the precursors look like, where they go, who they're sent to. You mentioned super labs as well, and I want to kind of hear that too. If you could kind of talk maybe from China into household in America, what does that pipeline look like, and who are the people involved in it too?
Okay, so I think it would be more productive if I gave you a little chronology so people would understand how it's evolved and the roles have changed. So let's first of all remember that the Chinese criminal networks, the chemical brokers, have had relationships for probably 30, 40 years with the Mexican cartels, because they were the big suppliers of the precursor chemicals to make methamphetamine for a long time, okay? So that's number one. And where it changed in my world is when I was the head of the SOD operation in Washington, there was a $207 million cash seizure made in Mexico City. And it was the largest seizure that I know of anywhere in the world in a drug case. I have never heard of anything bigger. And most of the money seized was in $100 denominations, which was very unique, very odd. And it came from a Chinese chemical broker. So that was kind of an eye-opener for me as the head of the Special Operations Division, because it was such an alarming amount of money. Like, why would a Chinese guy be involved with a $207 million? And what's scary is if they declared $207 million in Mexico, can you imagine how much was actually there? Oh, my God. Because you know how that goes, right? So anyway, now that happens in 2007. Now, going back to 2000, I want to just go back. I forgot the important part, 2005, 2006. We had mass amounts of people dying in America from fentanyl poisoning. It was mostly in the Midwest. So DEA Chicago, other agencies, Chicago PD, work with Mexico. They went after a lab in Toluca, Mexico, 2005 timeframe, and they wiped out the lab. And that was kind of our first indicator of the cartels getting involved with fentanyl. But again, it went away for years. So now what happens next 2008, 2009, we had what I say is the start of this very, very complex chemical synthetic drug bombing campaign coming out of China. We started getting hit hard with synthetic cannabinoids, synthetic cathinones, which are better known as K2 spice and bath salts in America. And no one really understood what was going on with that stuff. So we had to set up two very, very large-scale operations in my old entity, and we had all the agencies participating, trying to get a good picture on these chemicals coming out of the Chinese labs. And it was basically an operation called Logjam and Project Synergy all over the internet, because we crushed these organizations and we exposed the Chinese lab operators. We would send like undercover operators into China with the iPhones, taking video and pictures inside these labs, producing all this dangerous chemical. Now, if you go and look on YouTube and you find what synthetic cannabinoids and cathinones do to a person, you'll be amazed on the psychosis, the schizophrenia actions, the mental illnesses that it was causing. Again, we didn't really know much about it. And then 2012, we started seeing pure fentanyl analogs coming out of these labs through website sales directly to America. And we started seeing reports in America of what was reported initially as heroin overdoses. When the autopsies came back, it was actually heroin mixed with fentanyl, illicit fentanyl. So for me, as the head of this operation, I never realized the magnitude of fentanyl on the streets of America. This was all new to me. So we had a lot of learning to do. But what was really sad, Kyle, is we had a full-scale initiative. We called it Operation Deadly Merchant. We went to Attorney General Holder in 2014 with an emergency briefing on an emerging trend coming out of China, when the first time we've ever seen China, the Mexican cartels, and Dominican distributors pushing this poisonous substance and seeing massive deaths. Well, again, to be fair, this was new to everyone. We didn't realize the magnitude at the time. And so we watched this thing grow. Now, what happened was around 2015, 2016, a lot of things changed. The cartels in Mexico started wanting to produce this fentanyl. So they would send out of China some of these Chinese national chemists and other people into Mexico to try to help them make these fentanyl substances, okay? And then they started changing. Instead of sending a lot of fentanyl directly to America, they would start sending the pure fentanyl and the analogs over to Mexico so they can make the pills, so they can make it. They were learning. It was transitioning. So then they started, when President Trump came on board, he put a lot of pressure on China, and then we started seeing a much less pure fentanyl and analogs coming to America. It started going directly to Mexico. But here's the game changer that people don't have any clue. The cartels started using the Chinese nationals as the money laundering services people. And so the Chinese criminals would come into America, start picking up mass amounts of cash from the drug traffickers and laundering the money back and paying the cartel leadership in Mexico very quickly. So now they became the primary money laundering services for the cartels, and obviously the primary chemical broker for the cartels. So business started to increase. Now, just to give you an idea, in Phoenix DEA alone, in 2015, they seized 0 fake Mexican oxy pills, okay? Last year, they seized 45 million, just in DEA Phoenix alone. Now, why did that happen? Because the Sinaloa cartel controls all the routes into Arizona, and especially Nogales, okay? If you go online, you look at CBP's website, you can't believe the amount of fentanyl they're seizing at the Nogales port of entry alone. So then it started really ramping up because the cartels started getting more experience with not only making the fake pills, but making the powder that they were blitzing into the country. And now local distributors around America were buying the powder, buying pill presses, and making their own pills all over America. So the madness continues. But when we started seeing the Chinese involved with the money laundering, it really created a whole new opportunity for the cartels to make more money, reduce the risk of losing the bulk cash shipments. None of the cash, or I shouldn't say none of it, the majority of the cash was not going through the U.S. banking system. The Chinese businessmen were picking up the cash in America. They were using the cash to buy farmland, to buy property, to buy real estate, to invest in America. And then they were moving the money on their personal phones from their bank account in China to someone else's account in China to order up consumer goods, to order up precursor chemicals, to buy Bitcoin. And then that shit gets shipped to Mexico. They sell all these goods, and then the cartels get paid instantly. There's no risk. There's no vulnerability. So they're brilliant. And they were charging 0% commission when they first started doing this. So the cartels recognized it as a way not only to reduce risk and losing money, but they weren't paying any, broker's fees. Okay. So now that madness started. Now we started seeing deaths climb, rising, boom, 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 boom. Now they're into the new phase of chemical attack, because right now what we're seeing is, a lot less fentanyl is being exported out of China into America, but now they're exporting chemicals that are 20 times more powerful than fentanyl, like nitazene, edonitazene, isonitazene, metonitazene, protonitazene. It's a class of synthetic drugs that we call new psychoactive substances. And now America is faced with all these deaths from these new substances. And at the same time, they're making the xylazine, which is the tranq, which causes necrosis in a body, the rotten of human tissue from inside out. And people are in the streets of this country, rotten on the streets. Just go look at Philadelphia, Kensington, Pennsylvania. It's a war zone of all these zombies. It's all xylazine mixed with fentanyl and other substances. So the Chinese have started a full-blown campaign to destroy and destabilize America using these deadly substances. And Americans aren't putting the pieces together. They're still thinking this is grandpa's opioid crisis, okay? Now, one last phase of this thing. Now, because the border is wide open, we're now seeing record levels of Chinese nationals crossing into America. So as an example, in 2021, there was 342 apprehended illegally by the Border Patrol in the southern border. Last year, there was over 24,000. Now, this year alone, we have way over 18,000 that were apprehended. We have no idea how many are coming through in the Godaway numbers, where the cartels are getting paid more money to get them into the country. But what are they doing? They're establishing marijuana grow operations throughout America, sophisticated, complex marijuana grow operations with very high content THC, okay? And they are, like, there was a report leaked out of DHS where there were 270 in the state of Maine alone. We estimate over 1,000 that are out there in America now. Now, people want to know, well, no big deal. They're growing marijuana. It's okay. Go read CNN's health report yesterday, how marijuana that's being sold today is causing increased heart attacks, strokes, mental illness. There's all this new, studies coming out, and I talk to emergency room doctors. So kids are coming into emergency rooms now with very, very, psychotic or schizophrenia, mental illness, depression, anxiety. Because what's happening, Kyle, they're smoking this pure THC marijuana. Their highs are going so high and then so low, their brain is whacking out. Mm-hmm. So it's a new form of, and I'm not one of these, believe me, I'm not one of these
I was liking your
guys,
I liked your technical term. The technical term, the technical term whacking out. I really like that. Like, they're getting whacked out. But there's something, because I used to be a paramedic on the street. I've seen this sort of thing with the synthetic cannabis type products. And what do you call them? Cannabinoids?
K2 Spice, yeah.
K2 Spice. Guys would come in. They would be catatonic. Then they'd be euphoric, and they would be like we were fighting somebody that was on PCP. They would go back and forth. They were so hard to handle. They would literally be, there's a great example of this. This is one of the weirdest stories I ever remember. I'll never forget the guy, because he was a Mexican mafia piece of garbage. He was just, basic scumbaggery on the street. He was blacked out with his pants around his ankles, laying in a puddle. So he was wet, which is always a pain in the butt. They brought him in on the ambulance. He came to in the back of the ambulance. He looks over. There's a female paramedic there. He starts touching himself. That's terrible. We don't like that either. Comes into the ER. He's back to catatonic. Then we go out there and we're going to get a urine sample because we've got to figure out what the hell's wrong with this guy. And as we started to do it, he fought us, and it took 8 guys to hold him down and put it down. So these symptoms are really hard to deal with in a medical scenario because they're synthetic. But you're talking about now actual marijuana that is being grown with such concentrations. It sounds like it's the same thing that we were facing with the synthetics. Is that right?
Yeah, it's another phase. In my opinion, it's another phase, and it's the Chinese strategic plan to take advantage of the weak laws in America and the legalization movement of marijuana. They've recognized that is a good opportunity for them to continue their unrestricted warfare to destabilize America under the disguise of drug addiction and drug usage. So they're very smart, very calculated, and so it's this ongoing attack. And you know, again, if you listen to the FBI director, which obviously that's a sore subject, but what is Chris Wray saying a lot now? That the Chinese are our number one threat. And now you have an extensive background, so you would be well more versed than I am with China's, counterintelligence operations and their hacking operations. They're, stealing intellectual property, identity, right? We could go on all day about that, and I'm no expert on that, Kyle. But it makes sense that this is another tool in their toolbox to destabilize this country. And like Mike McCall said something in Congress one day, the former Homeland Security Committee chairman, he said the best strategic plan for China is to sell fentanyl to America. Let's think about it.
Yeah.
Right? And now America's too, I don't want to say America's stupid, but our leadership is stupid by not connecting the dots and dealing with this appropriately, because they're misleading the public. They're not actually explaining to the public the massive evolution of this problem and why this is important to everyone. This is not just like I said, a red or a blue problem. It's red, white, and blue, and everyone's going to be impacted. And it's happening quickly.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that. I tend to agree with you. First of all, I think China is obviously the biggest threat, and they come at us from all different angles, whether it be attacking infrastructure or cyber warfare, but they're also moving in and stealing intellectual property, and they're putting people across the border. This fentanyl thing is unique. They stand to gain financially. It sounds like they're being able to buy up the question of, like, how are they buying up all this farmland? It sounds like you just answered that.
Yeah, but by the way, Kyle, I ask you to go and look at this story. The Washington Examiner, like a year and a half ago, had a story where they determined that there was $6.1 billion in real estate transactions by Chinese nationals in America. Now, what's really alarming, and it was only like a year period. Mm-hmm. I forgot the period. But what was alarming to me is 59% of those transactions were cash transactions. Now, when you look at the Chinese, what do they call it? The flight laws? I forgot what they call it. They're limited to a $50,000 a year export of cash. So these Chinese businessmen, in my opinion, are using predominantly the drug traffickers' cash to make all these purchases to establish their operations here in America. Hey, what would happen if I went to China tomorrow and I wanted to buy property in China? Are you kidding me? We're letting these Chinese nationals buy all this property in strategic locations next to our military bases and next to our, secret installations out there. So it's really alarming. And like I said, no one's really talking about that in its totality.
That's the thing, the totality piece of it. That's where it sits for me. It's everyone looks at the simple. I mean, we're so busy trying to do the whack-a-mole for, there's fentanyl deaths. There may be synthetic drugs coming in. There's cartel people. Yeah. There's human trafficking. There's sexual trafficking. All those things are emotional buzz buttons. Somebody dies from it. But the bigger game, which is what the Chinese do, the bigger game is much, much bigger. And so let's kind of consider, what does it look like? What is that sort of larger strategic plan? And how do we assess, like, handing that to people so they can digest it in an easy way? The bigger plan is, it's not about drugs coming across the border. It's not about some guy getting high in his basin, as we just kind of said. It's strategic purchases with money laundering. It's the sophisticated, business of the cartels that's going on south of the border. And those players all have a vested interest. They still have to keep the United States as a customer, do they not? That's the cartel's interest. What do the Chinese hope to accomplish based on what you're seeing? Because, if they want to defeat America, they don't want to have like a black hole or a smoldering rubble of the United States, the continent here. That doesn't help them, I don't think.
Well, if they weaken America by killing our future generation, that helps them in a big way, a strategic advantage. That our education system is horrible right now with COVID. And let's not forget where COVID came from, right? And let's not forget, you're an investigator. You've been around a long time. We all have instinct about that. My instinct is it was deliberate. It was an attack, a biological weapon attack that went bad, maybe. I'm not saying I have all the facts. I'm entitled to an opinion.
Yep.
But you could see the devastation that the COVID caused. And then look at the impact on our kids when it was staying home, social isolation, losing years of education, right? Depression, anxiety, which also contributed to all these kids taking the pills. Okay. So there's a much bigger picture. I'm not an expert on the CCP. I'm not an expert on China, but it's just common sense to me from everything I've seen over the years, watching this thing evolve and paying a lot more attention to it. So that's what I think. And I got to tell you, I haven't read it yet, and I don't know what you think. And I'm not a book promoter, by the way. But here, the blood money that came out by Peter Schweizer this week. I mean, to me, that tells the whole story. And I haven't even read it, but I have he sent me the outline of what to expect in the book. And I can tell you, it makes perfect sense to me.
Right. Well,
it's hard. Anyway.
No, I haven't seen it yet, and I'll have to put that on my list as well. I think we're talking about a sort of a movement of sophistication in the time when first of all, federal law enforcement is under assault because I think it's doing political actions, particularly my ex-girlfriend, as I call her. The FBI is doing some awful news. They're basically sacrificing the ability to go after real poison, real danger, CCP, whatever it may be, going after January 6ers, which just doesn't make sense as a priority to me as a person. Just a sensible guy that looks at it and says, that's not killing people on the streets. That's not building up our greatest geopolitical adversary. But in a time when I kind of saw the DEA fall, like no one's yelling at the DEA right now. That's actually probably a good thing, because the threat from the DEA that the DEA used to handle was Colombian cartels, right? That was kind of the historical mission that we remember going back 70s and 80s. Bunch of cocaine coming in, bunch of money happening down there. There was some narco guerrillas that were happening. There was some different regimes that were getting funded. Now we're talking about a wholly different thing. That wasn't actually threatening our homeland in the way that we're talking about with the CCP. The sophistication has gone up. The danger has actually come more local, unless I'm misunderstanding what you're saying.
No. But you know what? We've seen an evolution there too. I was involved as the leader of the SOD in Project Cassandra, which was the multi-agency effort led by us at SOD to actually infiltrate and expose Hezbollah's global drug trafficking and money laundering activities. Mm-hmm. And we actually infiltrated, the highest levels of the, Quds forces and the operatives that were trying to support Iran and support the radical agenda of Hezbollah. Okay. Now they were making hundreds of millions, billions actually. In the one guy we indicted, he was moving $200 million a month back to Hezbollah, okay? And he's on the run still, but they were doing a used car deal. What they were doing, Kyle, real quick, is they were shipping multi-tons of cocaine into Africa. The drugs were being sold all over the world, primarily in Europe. The monies were being collected. The cash was collected. And then Middle Eastern couriers were transporting the cash back to Beirut. Hezbollah militants bringing the money into the money exchange houses, then routing that money into Lebanese Canadian Bank and other banks, and then U.S. transfers into America to car dealerships all over the country. They were buying cars and shipping them back to West Africa to sell, and it was all done as this very, very sophisticated trade-based money laundering scheme to support Hezbollah's efforts after the 2006 war with Israel. They needed cash, not only for Israel, but for Syria. And drug trafficking was generating so much money for them, and it was easy money, and they were tapping into that. So we've seen the evolution, and then, of course, this is like at a whole new level, right? Because China's capabilities, are just massive. So, yeah, it's getting more complex. It's getting more difficult. And unfortunately, Kyle, because Congress has cobwebs in their eyes, in their ears, and their ass, they don't pay attention to technology. They don't know what's going on, right? The president's on TikTok. I mean, wow. We're over here hearing such a the first job of a leader is eliminate confusion, not create it. So we have one side of the government saying, oh, TikTok is very dangerous for national security. They're getting on our phones. They're going to steal your information. And then the president's got that goofy video, was it ice cream video, whatever the hell it was, where he's talking on TikTok, and he's so dry, he's so boring, but yet the kids are watching. Oh, the president's using TikTok. This is great. So he's like an advertisement for China with TikTok. It's crazy. But anyway, I don't even know how I got on that whole TikTok thing, but basically it's very dangerous times. But I want to point out something to you real quick.
Sure.
So everyone says, the kid took a pill. You know, the kid should know better. Well, did this kid know better when he went to the daycare center, this 1-year-old beautiful boy? His mom drops him off in New York. And because the savages in New York left the kilos of fentanyl on the mats, the kid died. What about this kid from Louisville, Cash? Yeah, he's in the coffin. His mother gave me this. She's trying to get awareness, right? This kid went to the father's house, and he went upstairs into the tenant's room, and he touched some fentanyl. This kid's not addicted to drugs, okay? Now, what about this? Are we paying attention to the military that's dying at record levels? Because they're all stressed out, because now in the military, all these new things are being taught to military, DEI, and all this wacky stuff. That's not why you sign up to be in the military. The brave men and women sign up in the military to defend America, and they will do whatever it takes. My brother came back in a body bag doing this stuff. They didn't go there to hear about all this. The militaries, they're not discriminating against their brothers and sisters. They're fighting with them. They're dying with them. So it's disgusting. What about this beautiful 17-year-old or 19-year-old University of North Carolina management program? Beautiful kid. She goes to visit her boyfriend in Duke. He gives her a pill. She dies. And then the universities try to cover it up. They don't report it. They don't want to taint the image of their university. And so we have really bad problems going on in this country. And for everyone that's maybe watching this, I don't know if it's on, will be on, but here's the State of the Union right now. So after 9/11, Kyle, you're very familiar with this chart, the Homeland Security color chart. Right now, we're in severe because we have so many unknowns and ghost criminals in this country. We have no idea who's here, why are they here, what are they going to do, who sent them, what's their motive. So we're sitting here just getting ready to respond.
It's intense. I'm going to take a deep breath for that one. Just for one moment. There's so many things. A second ago, you said, I don't even know how we got here, but there's so many of these interconnected issues. And it's such a big problem. It's so hard to see the bigger picture. Cars being sold. I mean, I remember, I was just thinking about this when we were, we would see Africans and Middle Easterners that would buy up car dealerships. And we're like, why are these guys buying Bentleys? What the hell's going on? And then we'd find out they were putting them into shipping containers and sending them to Africa. And they're money laundering. Like everything in this global economy is connected. And it's more and more of a complicated threat. And that's the reason I think it's so scary that when we're wasting priorities on things that are not the mission set of your agency or my former agency, and we're not getting involved in like, this is a really hard thing to wrap your head around. You just went on a rant about all these different pieces that are connected, and it's people's babies, and it's, car dealerships that are buying and doing fraud, and it's Chinese business people buying, sensitive property right next to our military base. It's an enormous threat, and it takes really, really capable, focused people that can't take their eyes off the ball, because the minute you do, they've innovated and they've created a new scheme or a new scam, right?
So, Kyle, I want to tell you one other thing, because I see that you're very educated and very knowledgeable and had a lot of experience in the FBI with this stuff. So one thing that we didn't even talk about, which actually gets me like sick when I talk about it, but I want you to know. And I'll follow up and I'll send you my document that I made, because I've been obsessed with this for many years. So what I didn't talk about is when K2 and Spice was being distributed all over the country, the majority of distribution emanated from gas stations, bodegas, and convenience stores owned by Middle Easterners, and in many cases, people from Yemen, okay? What we watched is the movement of millions and millions of dollars going back to Yemen, which at the time was the hub for AQAP over there in Yemen, right? Al-Qaeda's cell. And there was a guy named Sheikh Zindani, who was Osama bin Laden's radical cleric that was involved with the East Embassy bombing. He was recruiting all these radical jihadists for many years in Yemen, and they had these worldwide fundraisers that they were getting all these young kids from around the world to understand you got to send money back because we're fighting the big issue, right? And so we were seeing millions of dollars go back there. And then when the Houthis got down there, they were advertising on the news that they were collecting all this money and all this cash was flowing into Yemen. But here's the scary part. Remember Wali El-Hajj, who was involved with Osama bin Laden's terrorist attack on the East African embassy bombing? Mm-hmm. He's in jail for the rest of his life. He was convicted. He was the terrorist behind that. He's got like 7 kids. They lived in America, in Texas. On front page of Newsweek, there was an article, married to Al-Qaeda. Well, one of his sons was arrested running one of these bodegas in Texas area, Dallas, Texas, in 2016. So in my opinion, and I have a lot more information on this, for years they were using these convenience stores as mini crime centers, untaxed cigarettes, drug paraphernalia, EBT fraud, underage drinking, all these different things, and then synthetic drug trafficking, and then sending money back, hundreds of bodegas around the country, sending money back to support Hezbollah, Houthis, and ultimately Iran. And I went to the FBI headquarters, and that's another story for another day, because I'll have a heart attack if I go through this story. But I went to the FBI, and I had a book similar to this. So now I have my fentanyl book, right? I went there with all my information on that, and I warned the FBI, and I warned Jim Comey my last day on the job. This was a serious threat. And now it's kind of ironic when I hear about how effective the Houthis are with all their missiles and everything. So I would say, based on my experience as a trained investigator who's very engaged over the years, that the bodegas and convenience stores and the illegal activity in this country has been going to support the Houthis and Hezbollah and other organizations for many years, and we never really put that together. That's pretty sad and pathetic, and it supports what you're saying about prioritization and investigative work that's being done.
It's such an incredible, multifaceted, multi-headed threat coming at us, but they all go back to the same kind of things. One, a goal of undermining the United States as a global power and sort of undermining the moralization of this country, right? You're going to take the weakest thing and you're going to encourage that, make it easy, make it accessible. I saw guys that were overdosing on spice and K2 in the military. I mean, they were taking this stuff because it was available off base in these crappy little bodegas or gas stations, just like you're talking about. I saw guys that were standing on the edge of a bridge and they had to get tackled by MPs because they lost their ever-loving minds because they took something that was considered to be legal. They were sold over the counter to people and it had some concentration of God knows what. But that money, even more nefarious than bothering some poor idiot guy that decided to take some drug that doesn't make any sense and doing something stupid on the weekend, when it goes back in and is funding a bigger operation that is actually building weaponry and supporting Hezbollah, that is supporting an Iran. Man, I was also hearing stories about whether or not there were Mexican cartel connections to things like Hamas, because there's a trade of skill sets. The cartels tend to be pretty good at building tunnels. I don't know why they are, but it seems like Hamas is actually even better at doing that. And so you've got the guys that are in Hamas that are professionally building tunnels, right?
Shared tradecraft.
Right. So you've got the ability to smuggle people, drugs, material, weapons, etc., into Israel or into the Palestinian West Bank, or this kind of situation. All of these things sort of have overlapping skills, and it's all about, can we move things that are illicit? And that's why I kind of hone in on the idea that even though I'm not a big guy about caring about whether people do drugs or not as a personal level, I really don't care what my neighbors are doing. It doesn't matter. As long as you don't come into my yard, it doesn't matter to me. However, the people we're talking about are not just trying to sell some recreational product. And if it was illegal, they'll move, bombs, explosives, they'll move people, they'll move children, they'll move a drug, anything that's illicit. Basically what they've said is that there's money to be made in contraband. When I was going through the academy, they always used to yell, contraband, the government's property. It was like the joke in the FBI academy. Contraband is anything that we know is going to be outside the law. And that's what these people are in the business of. It's not about a specific product. Would that be more or less accurate?
100%. It's what I would call very, very smart strategic operations. And shame on America, shame on our intelligence community, shame on law enforcement, shame on everyone. There's so much blame. You don't want to pick on any one entity, but that's what we're supposed to be doing, connecting the dots, keeping Americans safe, right? Securing our borders. Right now, it's an absolute chaotic state.
How do we address some of these things in the nuts and bolts way? Everybody has got, we can all rant about the things that drive us nuts. And I'm sure we both have our own,
hours and hours of that sort of thing built up in our soul at this point. But what we always hear this cry, and Americans are just feeling like, do something. I see it in my live chat all the time. Do something. Like, what is that something that people can, individuals can do, politicians can do, law enforcement can do? Let's talk about that.
So, okay, right off the bat, one of the most important things to do right now that everyone can control as parents, as uncles, aunts, grandparents, right, brothers and sisters, is we have to educate the young about the dangers of the illicit drugs today and how it's different and why it's different, all right? So what I've called for, and I still call for it, but it hasn't moved very quickly, the president should be declaring a national security public health emergencies from these chemicals that are coming into the country. And he should bring social media influencers, celebrities, role models, professional athletes, both men and women, to the White House and educate them about why this is different, why this is a mass poisoning, and why they need to get involved. And how do they get involved? They create 30-second, 45-second video reels about the dangers of these illicit drugs, and they go on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and that's where all the kids are every single day, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day. The kids today are not watching social media. I'm sorry, they're not watching cable news. They're not watching mainstream media. They're not watching congressional hearings. They're not listening to podcasts and all this informative stuff like you're doing and everyone else. They're watching the video reels all day. They're funny as hell. I watch them.
They are.
You watch them, right? You sit there, you get addicted to it. So if some Michael Jordan, not even Michael Jordan, he's a little older, but like Tom Brady, Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift, Steph Curry, LeBron James, they start putting out short videos, the kids are going to go, wow, we didn't know about this. And maybe that's going to save lives. They're not even doing the basic. Second thing, we're not actually holding CDC, Department of Education, responsible and accountable. So right now, the CDC stats on fentanyl poisonings is horrendous. We don't know how many people are poisoned every day because Narcan's out there saving so many Americans. We would have no idea how many people on a national level are being poisoned. The deaths are always miscategorized. There's no leadership on consistency of reporting across the country. I talk to families about this all the time. It makes them so upset because they can't get accurate autopsy reports. The labs are overwhelmed. The medical examiners can't handle it. Like in Seattle, King County, the first 23 days of last year, they had no cooler space in the lab, in the morgue for the dead bodies because they don't have resources. They're getting overwhelmed. So there's no really good statistics. You got to really assess the threat, you have to have the statistical data, right? You have to have the data. Then you also have no education to our younger Americans. Department of Education can go in and teach, all these different topics. I'm not going to name them, but you know what I'm talking about, okay? But the kids can't hear about the dangers of taking a prescription pill from somebody that it's not, prescribed to you. Like little things like that can be done. There's a movie, Dead on Arrival. I encourage everyone in America, 20 minutes with your kids, your grandkids. I work with the families. As a matter of fact, Monday night, I'll be at the FBI Academy. Hundreds of state and locals will be talking to them. We'll be bringing the parents in that have lost their kids, that have made the documentary Dead on Arrival. It's like I said, 20 minutes, so there's no excuse. And it's very powerful. Things like that can be put on steroids. When's the last time you saw a PSA, Kyle, during primetime TV from ONDCP as an example? I haven't seen one, okay? And I've been calling for them for a long time. So there's a lot we can do on the demand side, the education, which is not being done. And there's no excuse for that, okay? Now, in my opinion, if you walked in your house today and you had a massive water leak and your pipe exploded in the attic or whatever, what's the first thing you have to do?
Turn off the water main.
Shut the main valve off. So the main valve of our problem now with the death and destruction is Mexico and the cartels. So why are we sitting back, rolling out the red carpet for the Mexican government instead of being aggressive and telling them we want to use our best assets, best authorities to go after the cartels? We want to work with you. We don't want to do it unilaterally, but we have to save the American lives. We can't afford to lose 100,000 plus every year. Now, if Mexico doesn't want to do it, then we have to treat the cartels like ISIS, treat them like Al-Qaeda, and decimate them, wipe them off the face of the earth, because we can't have anyone attacking these beautiful kids and killing these kids. nobody really thinks killing kids is a good thing, right? So we have to be aggressive. Now, with China, it's way out of my understanding of the complexity of the threat. But there are little things like some of the tariff stuff that President Trump was doing to kind of, get them to change with the movement of the chemicals. Right now, they know America's weak, and they're going to completely take advantage of the weakness. So we have to step it up. But the other thing, Kyle, and having a lot of experience running probably the largest, synchronization operational center in the country on criminal law enforcement, okay? Because, of course, FBI has their JTTF operations and stuff like that. But I will tell you that the agencies are not being held accountable across the board for information sharing, for unity of effort operations, focusing on the biggest threats to the country. That's another leadership problem, right? So there's things that are self-inflicted that we can correct overnight to make things a lot better. We're not going to solve anything overnight, but we can curtail the amount of poison coming in. We could, if we shut off the money flow and the chemical flow, which we could do with U.S. military assets by the ports in Mexico where these container shipments are coming in. Mm-hmm. And we have really good capabilities, as you know, in the U.S. government. And we're not taking advantage of that right now because we're not treating this as like a war. We're under war. We're in war right now. Okay, not traditional war. Like the B-52s aren't coming over, Northern Virginia right now. But we're at war. The soldiers are on the ground. The gangs are set up. And they're going to rip apart this country if we don't start doing something. So there are tangible things that can be done, but you need leadership and you need honest people that are going to tell the public the truth, not in the best interest of any one party, but the best interest of the American citizens that pay their salaries.
Absolutely. What do you think about the you just drew a really clear line between the narcotics trade and the terrorist sort of threat that exists. And so counterterrorism resources are put into these fusion centers. I know that we have task force like HIDA and things like that, the high intensity drug trafficking areas. Do we need to be fusing those together, that our fusion centers need to be dual, like narco-terroristic trafficking?
First of all, the first thing that has to be done is an assessment of the capabilities that are out there. Because what happens in this country, and actually Washington Post had a really good story years ago in like 2004, top secret America, they called it. The government's building up all these capabilities all over the Beltway, spending billions and billions of dollars. The private companies are making all this money. The problem is if they're not connected and there's no synergy, it's almost defeating the purpose of what we're trying to do. Now, I believe everyone's well-intended, right, to build up capabilities, use technology, but you have to have leadership to understand how it comes together and who's accountable for the results. Right now, accountability for results are out the window. And especially on the information sharing, believe me, I do this every day. I built the deconfliction systems 20 years ago. I had a saying, if you want to connect the dots, you have to collect the dots. Because I was frustrated seeing the communication data scattered throughout all the agencies. And it was siloed everywhere, so you couldn't connect the networks. As you know, the saying, illuminate the networks. Well, we need to illuminate the networks, identify the weaknesses, and decimate them. We could do it if we have the leadership to bring people together. Right now, the federal agencies are in disarray. Everyone's looking for retirement jobs. They're looking to retire, take care of their families. They feel like they're on the Titanic after it hit the iceberg, so they want to get back to safety and security. But unfortunately, once you leave, then you can no longer contribute to the fight that we need to fight. So we're losing mass amounts of quality, experienced law enforcement personnel around the country, not just law enforcement either, intelligence community, DOD, right? So we're losing that experience. At the same time, the traffickers are more and more sophisticated. The technologies are putting us in the dark. So we're losing the ground, the good guys versus the bad guys. We're losing a lot of ground and the gap between good and evil. So I'm going to show you something real quick. I made this on my last week of the DEA, and I even showed this to Director Comey on my last day on the job. The red line represents the complexity of the threat. The green line represents the ability to deal with the threat. And the other line is the gap between good and evil. Mm-hmm. So as time's going on, the gap between good and bad is growing, which means every American is at risk.
It seems very
It's
simple.
that simple.
It is. Here's the simple, or maybe the ugliest question. Do you think this is nefarious, or is this incompetence in our inability to go after the threat?
You know, that's a really good question, and I'll try my best to answer that. Well, you know, when you were working in your job for years and you were focused on going after bad guys, you weren't paying attention to the politics as much. You weren't paying attention to all this nonsense. When you retire and you look back, you start seeing the nefarious side of things. So crystal clearly, I will use the example of the Hunter Biden laptop, okay? As a guy that grew up in a family of public servants and a guy that forever thought everything was like, you know, about law and order and keeping Americans safe. You know, as you know, law enforcement, we don't make a lot of money, and we're out there, you know, sacrificing our lives, leaving our kids behind, our wives behind, our husbands behind. And then you look back at all these intelligence officials are signing a letter that Russia, that the laptop was Russian disinformation campaign, and then it's funded by the Hillary Clinton Foundation and all the stuff that you know. I don't have to get into all that. But that's really, really sad to me. Like, as a guy that grew up dedicating my life, burying my brother, to think that this can happen in this great country. And now when you see the weaponization of the Justice Department, or you see the stolen elections, the fraudulent elections, no voter ID, you start scratching your head. I have no hair, but you start scratching your head and you wonder, how's this happening? Why is this happening? It's really, really difficult to understand for people that are patriotic, that care about this country. And I do believe the vast majority of Americans, no matter what they vote for, they are good family members. They love their country. They love their family. You know, they're trying to, you know, make their kids live in a world that is better than that they lived in. So I think the majority of people, but now we have something going on, which is hard for me to articulate, which it is a lot more nefarious now than ever. When our own government is actually involved in things that you never would have dreamed of. Like, think about it. The intelligence community is signing a letter that laptop is Russian disinformation. Are you kidding me? Pfizer intercepts on these I mean, I can't even imagine. When I worked in my operation, I knew that when I got a top secret document, I wasn't leaving that skiff. I wasn't coming out of that room, even in my operation, right? Now people are going home with this stuff and, you know, keeping it in the garage or whatever it may be. It's saddening. And on that note, not playing politics, but I want to say this because this bothers me. Put aside all politics, just use the individual. Donald Trump's being prosecuted for massive mishandling of classified information. Joe Biden obviously mishandled classified information as well, but he's too senile and he's too old and he's forgetful, so we're not going to prosecute him. Here's my problem with that. And I'm not suggesting he should be prosecuted or Trump should be prosecuted. That's irrelevant. But he's qualified to run America during the most complex times in the history of this country. That doesn't make sense.
Not a bit. Not even a little bit to me. And that double standard, that playing politics at DOJ, I think that that's the thing that confuses so many people. I tend to agree with you that most people, even at the top, are getting shoved out because they came in with the idealism. They came in and now they're looking for that retirement gig. They got to get out because the agency that they joined is not the agency that they're a part of at this point. The word betrayal has come up a lot for me in the last couple of weeks. The concept of betrayal, which is to say you signed up to do one thing, you dedicated your life to doing that as a professional. You thought you were part of the team that's Team America, not, you know, like you say, not red or blue, but red, white, and blue. And then you're being asked to do, or your agency is shifting your efforts in the wrong direction. Doesn't matter if you're Border Patrol, DEA, FBI, doesn't matter what agency you're part of. Can you reflect a little bit on the betrayal, both of the people that are currently doing the job, but those who did the job, that have that retirement check coming in, they have that credentials at the name, they spent all that time building a legacy, and now we're seeing it looks like in shambles a lot of times.
Yeah, so I want to use the Border Patrol as an example because, like, I know a lot of Border Patrol men and women, and I have my friends that I work with now in Border 911 tell me a lot of these stories, and they grew up in the ranks of Border Patrol. So when these guys and ladies are signing up for Border Patrol, they really believe they're trying to protect America, and they're out there putting their lives on the line in the middle of the deserts and doing the job. But unfortunately now they are doing babysitting and administrative duties every day, and they see the country falling apart. So they're feeling very depressed, very anxious. The suicides are going up. The domestic violence is going up. The alcohol incidents are going up. And the reality is it's because they can't understand, wait a minute, I was sold that if I took on a job at Border Patrol, I could save American lives, and that's what I want to do. I'm red, white, and blue, and I lived in Texas my whole life. I want to do something for the country. And then they're realizing, wait a second, that's not what I signed up for, and now I'm stuck in this. But then it gets worse, Kyle. Now their bosses are not telling the American public the truth because the bosses are basically giving talking points of what the administration once said, which is contradicting. The best example is the DHS secretary is saying he's got operational control of the border. And everyone in America, if you watch the videos, if you see what's going on, you know that's an outright lie. And he was barely impeached in the House. He most definitely, in my opinion, will not go through in the Senate, right? Because of the politics. But he lied to America. He lied to Congress. And there's no accountability. So people are getting very disgruntled and betrayed. They feel betrayed because they were misled. They could have been involved in other professions. Now they're stuck in the mud or in the quicksand of law enforcement, not doing what they signed up to do. So, yeah, they were misled. They were betrayed, whatever word you want to use. And that's what's kind of going on. So those that are in the job long enough that could retire, they're jumping off the ship. They're gone. And now the agencies are stuck with the remains, and the remains don't have a lot of experience in many cases, okay? As you know, how many guys, for an example, in the FBI, and I'm not picking on the FBI, I'm just stating the fact, okay? They were brand new agents at Quantico. They got assigned to the counterterrorism division. They weren't ever arresting anybody. They never went out and did real investigations. They were headquarters guys. Then they became, division, unit chiefs or section chiefs, whatever they're called these days. And then they became SESs running the entire division. Now, Comey did change that, I was told, that he felt that the guys had to go into the criminal division. I don't know if that's true.
They just ignored it.
Yeah. But again, so you know what I mean by experienced investigators. Unless you're out there in the real world doing the investigations, making arrests, going to court, dealing with the interagency, you're not learning the job. So some of these people, not just FBI, are running divisions of all these agencies now, running entire programs for these agencies. That's scary.
Yeah.
Remember that chart I just showed you? That's contributed to the green, okay? A lot of the green is self-inflicted. Mm-hmm. It's like the prosecutors. Department of Justice, for many years, not just the current administration, we let these prosecutors get away with not prosecuting. Now, I was very fortunate. When I was in SOD, we had the Southern District of New York. We were prosecuting all these big international criminals. They supported us. But around the country, guys were out there. My buddy just wrote this book, on Fast and Furious. Where the hell is it? The Deadly Path. Peter Forcelli, an executive. Go read this book. He'll talk about all the weapons and grenade parts that were going to Mexico to supply to the cartels. But the prosecutors wouldn't prosecute. They'd have to let them go. Now, this is nothing new to anybody like you and me and others that worked in this field, but the public doesn't understand that. That also contributes to the green line, and that's something that can be turned around tomorrow with the right leadership.
No, that's 100% a political problem. The will to prosecute is just, it's so atrocious. And when you see the declination letters come in for things that are legit cases that need to be prosecuted, but it's not the priority of a regime, you just go, God, what are we doing? You also just triggered sort of my mental crisis of the number of senior executives at the FBI that have 3 to 6 years of field experience, which is when I was leaving, by the way. That's when I was getting tossed out. I was right coming into the prime where I was like, all right, now I know how the agency works. Now I know what the mechanisms are. Now I've seen enough bad things. And I was also, by the way, I came in at 36, which is not all that common. So I got a lot more life experience. And now I'm ready to start doing some real casework. And that's the time when those people are moving on to management and they're never going to see another case again. And they're not going to see another case. They're going to be SESers 15 years in the management track, 6 years or less of investigative, of which the first 3 you're just trying to figure out where your ass is. So most of these people have no idea what's going on. And then they'll come and tell you, well, I had the best cases in my division. It's like, no, you didn't. You were the newest person. You didn't have any of the best cases because you didn't know how to run sources. You were a weirdo. You were just learning how the agency worked. And then suddenly, They moved you on to the next step. It's like they checked a box at the minimum level of capabilities and qualifications, and that is that experience gap. Your gap is right on. It doesn't have to be exactly right for us to know that there's a widening gap between experience and the enemy's capabilities, which are scary and big. I'm really glad that you're out there yelling about this stuff, and I know that's just the New York way. You got that excitement, that energy behind it. It feels right.
Well,
it feels like the right energy to have about this problem to me.
So put it this way, I will tell you that, and this is going to sound kind of corny, but it's true. There's three things now that drive me like this every day. Number one, I'll never forget 9/11. I'll never forget my brother's excitement to go fight for the country in Afghanistan. He told his mother he's going to see it next time. The next time my mother sees him is in a body bag. So he knew he was going into the bad situation. He trained his whole life in the military and then finally got some action in Afghanistan. Anyway, and then, of course, the families I've been supporting about 7 years, doing rallies, making collages, listening to their stories. They've called me the voice of the voiceless, which I think is a pretty cool title to have because you're impacting a lot of people, and that really makes me feel pretty good as an old retired guy. The third thing is, of course, my own family, right? So my own family, I want my kids to have a life that I've had. I've had a pretty good life, and I want to see those kids to grow up with opportunities, financially and family opportunities. And right now I see a train going off the cliff. So I feel like, if not me, then who, right? Like I have to step up. We all have to step up. You're stepping up by doing these kind of things and all the other work that you're doing. So people have to start stepping up. We have to have more people, but unfortunately, everyone's afraid to do that as well, Kyle, because they're afraid of the retribution, the retaliation. I mean, honestly, like I think about it because I'm over here. I honestly try to stay out of the politics as best I can. I'm just saying things that impact everyone. You look at my charts, the charts of these families, there's black, there's white, Hispanic, there's Eskimos, there's Indians, there's rich, there's poor. Little Cash, his mother was a drug addict in Kentucky, and she tells her story. You want to hear her story? She says, my baby died from someone else's addiction when I stopped my addiction because my baby's birth, right? It was pretty sad. And that lady, she's very passionate, but she's like, these families have inspired me and motivated me to do more. And that's just the way it is. But I feel like a little bit beat down at times because I don't see the level of engagement. And again, I'm not just blaming the current administration, but when you open up the border, you've just facilitated the ability for the Chinese and the Mexican cartels to kill at record levels and make billions of dollars. And one last thing I want you to know about this. I failed to say it. So in September, I went to the DEA's largest international drug law enforcement conference in the history of the DEA. They had 130 countries together collaborating, cooperating on the international drug crisis. But unfortunately, the one country that did not show up was Mexico. Now, to me, I immediately made a video from outside the facility in Jamaica, and I was really upset about that because the administrator of DEA was talking about all these dead kids. They had the Faces of Fentanyl exhibit in the headquarters, and to think Mexico wasn't there, and then we let them get away with that. Mm-hmm. I would have shut the money off that day. I would call the State Department and say, Mexico gets nothing. And when they want to know why, because our kids are dying at record levels and they threw sand in our face and they didn't show up at the conference and everyone recognized their absence.
It seems reasonable too. And yeah, that just seems like a lack of political will in so many ways. What is the best way for people to follow, support? Where do you want to prioritize sort of the efforts as folks are looking at you?
Right now, border911.com. Like I said, I'm on a team with 6 American patriots trying to fight for everyone. So I really appreciate any type of support. We're having an event, like I said, April 4th at Mar-a-Lago. But I also have, Derek Maltz _senior at Twitter. I have Facebook, National Security Public Safety Group. Every day I try to push out whatever I have. I have a YouTube channel. I put all the media hits and all the podcasts and all that stuff as much as I can do by myself. As you know, doing this stuff yourself, it's very intense. But I appreciate your help. I appreciate your support to call me today to let me talk about this crisis. So thank you.
It's my pleasure to have you on. All the links we'll put in the show notes. So, folks, if you want to scroll down, you can see those in the description here, and you can find the Border 911. You can find the YouTube channel and so on. So we'll put all that stuff out there and mix it up on Twitter. Always the easiest thing to find that Twitter handle. It's so gross. You know what? I'll tell you this, just as a parting shot. Like, I never wanted to be in social media. That's kind of the opposite of what my instinct was as a guy in law enforcement, guy in the military. Like, I don't need this nonsense. And now it's where I constantly find the most information. It's where I'm constantly able to, engage with the most people across the country. So what a weird switch. I appreciate you staying in the fight as a retired guy. I know a lot of people want to take that pension and they want to go off into the hills. And they want to go and, sit on the porch and watch the sun come up. This country's not done with you, so I appreciate that you're not done with us.
Thank you, Kyle. I really appreciate it. Have a good day, buddy. Have a good weekend.
You do the same. Thanks so much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it. And I hope you appreciate the honesty, the truth. There's a lot of information there and a lot to absorb. And now you know more, and you're probably a little bit more worried about the world we're living in. That is okay. We'll be coming back again tomorrow with Friendly Friday. I want to suggest to you guys, if you want to support the channel, you can do so by going to Mad Hat Jerky. If you guys want to keep us rolling and you enjoyed that conversation and you want to hear more, MattHatJerky.com/Kyle. Again, Matt with 2 T's, hat with 1 T, jerky.com/Kyle. Use the promo code Kyle. That'll save you 20%. That's the incentive for you. It lets them know that we sent you over. And they've got a taste, love it or your money back guarantee. That's not nothing. I've got, I think maybe almost 2 pounds of jerky coming in today or tomorrow. I should have it pretty soon. I call it Jerky Day in my house when the envelope shows up full of flavorful USDA Prime original and black truffle with a side note of roasted garlic. Those are my 3 faves. They are the ones coming in. I bought like the 12-ounce bags because that's how we do it here. MattHatJerky.com/Kyle if you guys want to get your own. And if you also want to check it out, sounds like my pillow sheets are not going to make it until the weekend. So there will be no unveiling on the show with the large bath sheets. But you can get your own. Man, I got the transition going right now. MyPillow.com/Kyle. Again, MyPillow.com/Kyle. Use the promo code KYLE. That'll save you up to 50%. It's somewhere in between 20 and 50, depending on the item you get. The towels I got me 30% off using KYLE at checkout. You guys can do the same thing. By all means, check them out. Let's do a 5-star review. And then from the 5-star review, we'll go directly into a palate cleanser and get you guys ready for the Friendly Friday. Here's the 5-star review. This one's pretty easy. It's from Captain Crusher. It says, "You rock, 5 stars. Special Agents Kyle, Seraphin." This is Sheila saying, "Great show as usual." We do love our little Sheila Jackson Lee, don't we? She didn't make it for mayor in Houston, but she is an important part of the Kyle Seraphin morning wake-up call. Thanks for putting that in, Captain Crusher. If you guys want to have your own 5-star review read, which you should, go to the link in the show description when you're listening on Apple. If you're listening on Apple, go right now. There's no excuse. Just click on the link. Boop. It'll take you in. Fill out something clever, something witty, something sarcastic if you want, something weird. We like that. We appreciate it. And then we will read them here on the show. Let's go into a little cleanse of the palate, and then we will shut the sucker down. We've been doing the motivational series. I gave you a break for Weird Wednesday. The motivational series on the toddler situation. 1, 2, this is Toddler Motivational Podcast, Part 3. It's like Jocko Willink style, right? Toddler Motivational Podcast, Part 3, Episode 3, with Tyler Champagne.
Clothes are actually tiny prisons for your limbs. 27,000 years ago, they didn't wear Mickey Mouse t-shirts. Why should I? Rise and grind. Your teeth. Moms hate that. Ride your bike to the furthest possible point from your house, then refuse to ride it anymore. Make your dad carry it home. Now, you're a personal trainer. That's passive income. I don't get sick. I become the disease. If you have a newborn sibling, throw a plastic elephant at their head. Pressure builds diamonds, and concussions build hard workers. Are my shoes on the wrong feet? Or is the universe completely backwards and I'm actually right? Chaos. Keep having an awesome, psychotic attitude. Rome wasn't built in a day. That's why I fill my pockets with rocks every single day. One day, I will have enough rocks to build a Colosseum. Why do they call it ground beef? Because it's ground up? That's typical small-minded thinking. It's because you're supposed to eat it off the ground. The other day, I accidentally took a sip of my mom's cold coffee. changed my perspective. I was buzzing.
What a silly guy. That is the way toddlers think, though, isn't it? That Rome wasn't built in a day. Fill your pockets with rocks. That must be what my children are doing. They're constantly gathering shells and rocks. I don't know what we're doing. We're building like Conchina or something. In any case, folks, you can also support the merch store. Just throwing that on there before I forget. Garrett O'Boyle's merch store and the O'Boyle Family Sweatshop, the-dispendables.com. Use the promo code Kyle. That's it for today. That's all we can do. We'll recommend you guys go ahead and visit KyleSeraphin.com if you have any questions, comments, sarcastic remarks that you want to send and you don't want to put it in a comment, which you should. You can always reach us out there. There's a contact me form on the website, KyleSeraphin.com. We appreciate you guys coming in. And remember that our program is supported by you. Yeah, there's going to run some credits until we get a chance to do Friendly Friday tomorrow. Hang in there. Yeah. God bless you. And we will see you all very soon. I know this was a little bit long. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.